everyone. My name is Megan, and I'm so happy to welcome you all to our speaker series on election maps. This is part of our larger election mapping challenge, and the goal of this series and the map contest part of the challenge is really to encourage discussion and exploration of how data and location tools can support democracy, whether through data analysis, data visualizations, practical tools for voters, or anything else really. So today we're really excited to be here with Hope and Indraneel from the Princeton Gerrymandering Project to kick off our Elections Challenge speaker series. I'm really looking forward to diving into this topic and learning more about how we can use data analysis to reduce partisan gerrymandering. I know it's a topic that's been in the news over the last couple of years, so just really excited to talk to these folks about it today. But before we begin, I just have a few quick notes on how this discussion is going to go. We'll start with some time for our speakers to share about their work, and then we'll have time to answer questions from the audience. Everybody has the ability to ask questions or share a comment. If you are able to log into Twitch, that's how you're going to be able to get into the live stream chat. And I'll be collecting questions as we go. So I really encourage you to ask questions at any point. If the question is really urgent, then I might jump in during the presentation to ask Hope and Indraneel, but for the most part, we're going to be keeping questions until the end, but please ask away in the chat at any time and know that Marina and myself, we are collecting them and we're going to ask the presenters at the end. In the interest of keeping this event inclusive, we also ask that you keep the chat respectful, constructive, and focused on the work of our speakers. So with that, those are kind of like our ground rules. And without further ado, over to you, Hope and Indraneel.
Awesome, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Hope Johnson. I'm a data analyst at the Princeton Gerrymandering Project.
I'm Indraneel Purohit, and I am the project's product manager.
So quickly, our organization's mission is to bridge the gaps between law, math, and policy reform to promote fair redistricting. And so Indraneel and I both work closely on a project called OpenPrecincts, and so we'll focus mostly on that today. So first, just a quick refresher on what we mean when we say gerrymandering, so that we're all on the same page. So gerrymandering at its core is about drawing districts in a way that disempowers voters from being able to elect the political representatives that they want to. And gerrymandering is nothing new. It's been going on since the 1800s. There's this kind of famous salamander-shaped district that was drawn in Massachusetts, which is how the name gerrymandering came about. And the two main methods for gerrymandering are known as packing and cracking. So when you pack voters, you put them all into a district where they're not sort of able to have a lot of voting power, and cracking is like splitting them up into different districts. So in this little circle, in these circle images on the right, you can see, if you imagine that those little squares are precincts, and the black lines represent political districts. In the circle on the left, the purple precincts are all grouped together so that the green precincts have sort of control over the map. There are more green districts. And then when the circle is drawn in a way that kind of cuts it up into equal pie slices, the representation power flips and there are more purple districts. So that just goes to show that the way that the districts are drawn can really shift political power in a major way. And packing and cracking is most easily investigated when we have precinct level election results and precinct level boundaries available to us. So kind of the alternative to precincts are counties. That's kind of the next best, or like the next most granular election results available. And just to give you a sense, on average across the country, there are usually 30 precincts in one county. But that can change a lot in areas, with big cities. There can be thousands of precincts in one county. So the reason that we're so interested in precinct level results are because it's just a lot more granular information. So say in the chat if you know what state this is, and say in the chat if you know what city it is on the right. So just to dive a little bit more into precincts, in this map, the white outlined areas are precincts, And then the areas with colors are political districts, they're congressional districts. So precincts are really the basis of election administration. There's usually one polling place per precinct, and people within the same precinct have very similar ballots typically. And so precincts are kind of related to election administration, and at the same time, there's no standard definition of what a voting precinct is.
So we did have some answers in the chat for people who were looking at the districts. We have 3 that say Missouri, 1 that's saying Kentucky, or KC, I don't know if that's meaning Kentucky.
Kansas City.
Yeah, Kansas City, there you go. And then St. Louis is the guess for the city. Sorry, Kansas.
Nice.
I'm like.
So whoever said Missouri and St. Louis is correct. Great job.
Cool. So, you might be thinking, okay, well, like, if precincts are so important, then why, like, has no one done this before? Is no one like putting together these maps? Like, it seems like that's going to be really relevant. And we're definitely not the first group to like tackle this problem. On the screen right now is 2 New York Times maps that are like super famous for doing really great precinct level election reporting. So on the left is a Senate race, and if you know what state that is on the left, drop the thing in the chat also, the name of it. I guess bonus points for the abbreviation too. And on the right is the probably the most like notable one, which is the like super detailed national map that they made. Sort of where we're trying to make a difference here is that we're really going for 100% level accuracy. Obviously, this is really difficult work. It's not easy to say absolutely the least. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And getting topology errors kind of out of the data set is really difficult. So what we try to do is we try to make sure we kind of validate against other sources and take our time to figure out where errors are. And oftentimes we'll end up going and calling county clerks and things like that to find out sort of what's going on in the actual data. When we're also trying to focus on other data sets except the 2016 presidential election, which is what the map on the right here is. We're also focusing on other races from that year, and then also 2018 races, which is obviously the midterm election. So not a presidential year, but still trying to go and get that information.
And just so you know, we did have answers for the map question.
Oh.
It's guessed Virginia.
That's correct.
Correct. Cool. So in building open precincts over the last couple of years, again, what we're trying to do is get boundaries of precincts matched to historical election results, and then we're going to keep doing this into the future, so doing this for 2020 and onwards. And so just going briefly over the process for creating open precincts, we kind of thought that it would be fairly straightforward, naively, definitely. We thought that we would just have to get all the contact information for county clerks, get the precinct maps from them, and then match it to election results, which didn't sound too challenging. It ended up being a lot harder than we thought it would be, of course. And so some examples of places where it's been particularly challenging are California. It's a giant state, obviously, so there's just tons of precincts. And also the precincts change really often. The boundaries change quite frequently in California. So that's been an added difficulty. In Arkansas, I did all of the matching for Arkansas, and it was tough because the precinct names in the map would be similar, but not quite the same as the precinct names in the election results. And so actually sort of going through the process of matching all of those and verifying them with the county clerks was pretty arduous. And then in Pennsylvania, it's been difficult because we haven't had good luck with getting responses from the sort of county officials to actually get the maps of precincts themselves. So different challenges. Okay, so if you know what county this is on the bottom left, throw it in the chat. I will be really, really impressed if anyone knows what county this is. So this is just a screenshot of a county in Arkansas and the election results from a county in Arkansas. So just to give you a sense of the raw data, this is precinct level election results from Open Elections, which is a wonderful open source election project. And then I got this shapefile from the Secretary of State. So sometimes the Secretary of State will make the whole statewide precinct file available.
I don't see any guesses, so.
That's Jefferson County in central Arkansas.
Hard one to know.
Yeah.
But what's not so difficult actually is kind of where I take over the data. Hope and our team, they do a really lot of hard work to get all the data sourced. I get to use a lot of like the really great Mapbox tools to make the data available, which has like been super easy. There's still some process that might be interesting to know about. So obviously, since this is like super local data, we can't really like change the shape of it. That's kind of against the point. So we need it to be available kind of at the highest or the lowest of zoom depth. I always mix those up. But we need it to sort of be present at that level. And obviously states can be really, really big. I think either the shapefile size or the GeoJSON file size for like Alaska is like 1 gigabyte. So it's pretty difficult to make smaller. So luckily we can kind of convert it to Mapbox tiles, and that is super helpful. So we use Tippecanoe to create the GeoJSON from the shapefile, and then we create tile sets and send it up to Mapbox, which has been super useful. So when you go to openprecincts.org, the map that you see there, that's being served right from Mapbox, which has been super useful. And we're part of the community program, which is really helpful. Since again, just we really can't sacrifice on data in the way kind of other problems places can. So that's been super useful. So you might be wondering, you know, okay, and this is maybe the most relevant for folks watching today, you know, like what can we do with the data? Like how can we use it for, you know, either in this year or just, you know, as the decade goes on and the various kind of redistricting battles are fought, or for other things. But we'll talk a little bit about redistricting first. So if you kind of find yourself on election Twitter, and I mean like election nerd Twitter, not like just all of Twitter right now, drawing new maps is like kind of one of the bigger things you might see, especially around like redistricting time, and sort of as people kind of game out what's going to happen as maps are redrawn. And 3 of the big tools that you see that are super useful, and you know we love all of them, the Dave's Redistricting app, Districter, and District Builder. They're all free. They're all really easy to use, and kind of make it really like useful to people to be able to sort of draw their own maps and sort of have a sense of like, and it's maybe hard to see for folks, but this is Dave's Redistricting, and it's got sort of population by district and things like that. So it's a lot of kind of additional information that helps people draw maps sort of as they're thinking about what's going to happen in the cycle. And that could be useful for this stuff, which I think Hope will talk about.
Yeah, so the sort of map analysis is going to come into play a lot more often in 2021 once tons of proposed redistricting maps are released once the census is all done. And so we kind of had a practice round at Princeton Gerrymandering Project last year in North Carolina. So basically what happened was the state legislature in North Carolina released 19 possible redistricting plans all at once. And they said, we're going to pick one of these, but we're not sure which. So here, and they just gave us the shapefiles, or they put the shapefiles online for everyone. And so because we had the precinct level shapefiles matched with historical election results, we were able to take these 19 proposed redistricting plans and analyze all of them really quickly, because we took sort of the shapefile of the proposed redistricting plan, figured out which precincts were contained in all of those districts. And then we were able to say, you know, comparing all of them, this is what the partisan outcome of each map will be. And then on top of that, we're able to do this sort of more statistical analysis around, you know, how fair or unfair from a gerrymandering perspective each of the 19 plans was. And that's really only possible when you have granular data, like precinct level data, with boundaries matched to it. And so, like I said, I expect that in 2021, this is going to have to be happening all the time to tell whether or not a proposed map is fair.
And if Python's not your thing, which I think, again, I don't know if everyone can see this, but all the code that we have on the screen right now is Python code, sort of taking in the shapefiles and doing all the sort of kind of modified geographic assessments with it. If that's not your thing, we also make the data available in GeoJSON. So you can sort of work with this in JavaScript world, do more just sort of visualization of it, or just take the shapefiles and bring it into whatever language that you want. So we kind of really try to prioritize the usability of this data.
Great. And a sort of more advanced form of map analysis that we've done is known as Markov chain Monte Carlo sampling, or MCMC. And there's a group at Tufts University called MGGG that's done a ton of work in this space. So if you're interested, I recommend you check them out. So basically how this works is that you take a precinct map with historical election results linked, and from that map, you can create millions of possible redistricting maps. And that's what's being shown in this GIF on the left. It's sort of, you start from one districting plan, which can be the enacted plan or a proposed plan, and then just make tiny changes to the precincts along the boundaries of a district. And if they're legally permissible, contiguous and, all of the sort of criteria that goes into the law, you can just create this whole slew of millions of possible maps. And that's really nice because it allows you to do sort of an outlier analysis of seeing whether or not the enacted plan is, way more gerrymandered than all of the possible plans. And so this type of analysis has actually been used in courts before to prove that, a plan in Virginia or Pennsylvania or somewhere else where gerrymandering is kind of bad actually was, just a far outlier in the realm of possible plans. And in this graph on the right, it's showing just that. The sort of highest bar is at 9, which means that most of the plans in the group of all possible plans were about, half Democratic, half Republican favoring. And then the enacted plan, which is in the dotted line in red, is, just so far out there that it was really obvious that it was not a fair plan.
But yeah, I mean, if you're like me and you don't really come from a statistics background or a kind of an election analysis background, we think this data could be super useful and just have other interesting sort of qualities to it that can potentially just make for cool visualizations and maybe even cool research on top of that. So just as an example, or the kind of the biggest one that we hear a lot is census data. And that actually maybe leans a little bit more in towards redistricting analysis, but again, could be useful in so many contexts. Applying demographic data to sort of vote share is kind of a huge one when people want to sort of study things like polarization and sort of where people are versus how they're voting. And you hear a lot of that stuff sort of in election coverage right now, but it also kind of has broader implications towards like, how policy works and things like that. Another one that's sort of more recent that just kind of came out was the Center for Public Integrity made available a data set of polling locations. And that could be super interesting to compare polling locations by year, by state, to the precinct shapes. So that might be something that could definitely, show something. I'm not really sure what. It's not really my area. But and then something that's kind of more interesting to me that I would love to see somebody try to do, or I might myself, is kind of comparing road network data to precinct level election results. So on the right there, there's a professor at McGill who worked on, with his team, a sprawl map. So kind of applying a heuristic to the road network and seeing sort of how connected or not connected places are, and maybe comparing that to precinct level election results would be super interesting. I can think of a lot of other things, I don't know, like climate oriented data. There's a whole kind of spate of issues that could be connected to this stuff. And again, precinct level results gives you kind of the really, really deep granularity to take a look at that and sort of see what's out there. So that's the end of our slides here. We're available on Twitter at Princeton Gerry, and that's the sort of project's email address. Happy to answer any questions. If you're interested in getting involved, let us know. And yeah, I guess we'll take some questions now.
Yeah, great. Thank you both so much. That was amazing. And I feel like we all learned so much. There's definitely a lot of questions coming in through the chat, and please keep asking questions as we're in this Q&A session. So I guess the first one, Indraneel, I feel like you teed it up really nicely, is how can people get involved? What does that mean, and how can people get involved with this project and help promote it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I think probably the most important thing is to sort of get involved kind of locally to wherever you are. If you're in the United States, or if you know people who are. This problem is local. Gerrymander, we didn't really go into like the case law of it, and I'm going to butcher it if I try, but my general understanding is that like it's not something that's going to sort of be solved at the federal level. It's going to be really state by state. So pathways to reform are going to happen state by state. We didn't put it up on the slides actually, but if you go to gerrymander.princeton.edu, you'll be able to see sort of our kind of a map, not unlike the one behind me, but unlike in the way that it's more about kind of pathways to reform rather than sort of the data we've collected. So I guess that's the first thing I would say is like, read our website, sort of read up on what's happening in your area and try to figure out where the most leverage is that you can sort of apply there. Hope you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think some organizations that typically have kind of like local chapters that do a lot of redistricting reform work are Common Cause and the League of Women Voters. So those can be good places to look. And then in terms of sort of using the data to, start investigating whether or not, there's redistricting reform to be had in your area, I would say, just going to OpenPrecincts, downloading the data in your state, and like Indraneel was just suggesting, adding layers of other data that interests you to see where the problems lie, I think is a really good first step.
Thanks. We have kind of a fun one. What is election nerd Twitter? And is there a good Twitter list you recommend for someone new who wants to tune in to what election nerds are tweeting about?
I don't have a great list. I guess if you follow us at Princeton Gerry, Jason, who runs our social media, will probably, we can get on that actually. We can probably compile a list of people who work on sort of election stuff on their own. I guess if I had to summarize it, it's sort of looking at data and looking at things like redistricting, rather than maybe just sort of talking about the current sort of big race or things like that. So
thanks. And the next question here is, how do you deal with conflicting boundaries or topology?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not something that's easy to deal with. So I've learned a lot from the folks at MGGG, the organization that I mentioned earlier, and my coworker, Hannah Whelan. And what we do is typically we'll try to find multiple sources for a map if we do find topology errors. So, if we got a map from the Secretary of State that has, that it's just riddled with topology errors, we'll try to find another source. We found that there's one site called Election Night Reporting that has often has precinct maps. And then sometimes we'll go to the Census Partnership files, and they will sometimes have precinct maps too. So we'll just try to figure out some source of, a topology error-free map. And if not, then we'll kind of, go into QGIS and do our own, trying to fix it somehow. But we really try hard not to do that because it's so easy to make a mistake that way.
That makes a lot of sense. The next question, which is actually a question that I had as well, is the ultimate goal to have competitive two-party races? And do you take third parties or primary races into account with these maps?
So I would say that competitiveness is a goal of fair redistricting. And, in some places, because of the way that, sort of the political geography just exists, there won't always be 50% Republicans and 50% Democrats. That just, isn't always true. And at the same time, like a really telltale sign of voters being packed into a district is if no one even runs in a race year after year after year. There's no competitor. And so we kind of look at different angles of the problem to try to figure out if gerrymandering is happening. So like if incumbents are always protecting themselves, that can be a gerrymandered area. And so we look at competitiveness and also something that's known as responsiveness. So do the number of votes for a given party translate into the amount of political representation for that party? If 80% of the voters in a state are voting for Republicans, but only 40% of the, congressional seats are going to Republicans, that seems like some type of issue. So that's another way that we look at it, is responsiveness.
Are there states where finding precinct data, and I know we went through a couple of them in the beginning, such as Pennsylvania, where it's particularly difficult to get this information?
I mean, Hope knows more than I do, but just like looking, this is a map of like how much we've completed our data set. So I'll just be Vanna White for a second. So yeah, I mean, again, Hope will tell you more, but yes, in short.
Do you find that it's changing year by year? Like, is it consistently the same states that it's difficult to get the data from, or do you feel like it's another election cycle and there's a new set of rules that have been put out and now this data in the state or this precinct is difficult to get? Is it consistent, I guess?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I would say it is fairly consistent. Some states tend to have really good government laws around data transparency and data availability. And they also just have more resources to have GIS departments in each county. And some states just don't. So I will say one state that we've had major problems getting this data together for is New York. And it's also just a giant state with a lot of people. And California has been difficult as well. One state that is changing is New Jersey. That's been a really difficult state to get precinct level data for. And a bill was just passed so that a sort of specifically election data transparency bill. And so now there's a whole new GIS portal where they have all the precinct level data available. So that just shows that, kind of policy reform goes hand in hand with data transparency. And it's really great to see laws like that being passed.
And I think that actually ties in quite nicely to the next question. So are there any state and federal laws limiting the access or collection of precinct data and or election results?
I don't know about limiting. I think it tends to be kind of what Hope was just saying, it's sort of maybe a resource problem or yeah, I guess it would probably be the opposite. Not many states have the law that New Jersey just passed requiring the data to be made available in a machine readable format. If anybody sort of, and I think I saw somebody mention kind of a civic tech local program in the chat. So if you kind of work in that area, you probably do know that that's sort of one of the challenges is kind of the legibility of data that the government has or in this case doesn't have.
Yeah. Do they ever, is all the data when it is available, is it free and openly available, or are there any states that charge for access to this data?
So to my knowledge, states don't charge access for the data, but sometimes they just won't make it available. So for example, because elections are administered on the county level, there's no one-stop shop for national precinct level election results, except for the kind of more grassroots projects that have been spun up by people like us. And so I haven't ever heard of a state or a county charging for, precinct level election results. It's like sometimes they'll just release them in a way that makes it incredibly hard to work with, like handwritten, like literally handwritten tallies.
Yes. Or just like everything is in PDFs.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, why?
So, yeah. Yeah. Well, it just makes the work that you guys are doing just that much more important. And it seems beyond me how you're collecting all of this data from each state when every state has their own rules and how like the collection of data and yeah, it's amazing. So I guess the next question here is how can the Open Precincts process of collecting data from all states be improved so that it gets easier in future election cycles? This might not just be all on your pipeline, but also working with state governments. And is there a repeatable pipeline for incorporating future changes? And how do you keep it up to date?
I guess to maybe disappoint everybody, not really. It's quite a challenge, as everyone sort of knows. Not the main thing that's kind of the problem with the pandemic. Obviously, people have gone through much worse. But one of the issues is that now voting by mail is going to become more popular. So that's something we have to think about also, is that how does that change sort of, do counties collect that information, or do precincts still matter when people are voting by mail? So it really changes from election to election, like as a kind of like a ground level thing. And then on like the technical side for us, I think that sort of compounds there because it becomes a little bit more difficult to work with, an environment where things are changing from, time to time. And also I think another, and maybe Hope can speak to this, I think some states just don't really kind of practice the same sort of consistent definitions from cycle to cycle. So of precincts, I mean, so that becomes somewhat of a challenge where, it's kind of hard to set up a pipeline where you're not sure if, the precincts themselves are going to be consistent in that time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, we've tried our best, like on the Open Precincts team, to write code that is flexible to different states and different counties, like how the sort of names differ between the precinct map names and the precinct election names. And at the same time, it's like you can only code, like I feel like you can only write code so well to approach a problem that varies so much across counties and states. And so I think we can certainly do better. And at the same time, it's just a tough problem.
So here's the next question is, why do you take, for example, a proposed redistricting plan as the starting point for the Monte Carlo simulations? If I got that right, seems like small permutations to that plan wouldn't necessarily represent all possible plans.
Wow, great question. Getting in the weeds, love it. So you can start from the proposed plan, you can start from a random neutral plan. The thing about Markov chain Monte Carlo sampling is that if you run it for enough iterations, so make enough tiny changes in the district boundaries, you should get to a point where sort of the mixing is good enough that no matter where the starting plan is, the whole space of possible plans is explored. So sometimes this means, running your algorithm for hours or days, but you can run checks along the way at like 1,000 steps, 10,000 steps, and so on to see if you've achieved mixing. And at a certain point, the starting place doesn't matter.
Let us know if you have any follow-up questions to any of the questions that you've been asking here. Happy to keep going with the conversation, or I'm going to continue to go on to the next questions. So for example, if I draw a district with the aim of disenfranchising voters, does my proposed district have to fit precincts? Can I cut a precinct in half? Then they noted that they are not proposing to do such a thing, by the way.
Yes, technically districts can cut through precincts. We see that happening every once in a while, although it's not super common. The main thing is that often in redistricting rules, so like the legal criteria, you can't split counties, or you have to minimize county splits, and you also aren't, typically you have to sort of minimize splits of other political subdivisions or sort of municipal lines.
So they don't always, precincts don't always fit nicely within districts, and sometimes folks can break those up. I think that was an earlier question that we had and I might have missed. So great that we got that out there. I think this one is actually from Marina. And at a personal level, what motivates you, and you can jump in if you want to do this in your voice, what motivates you to work on this? And have there been things or experiences that have particularly surprised you during this work?
I guess for me, it seems like one of the, I mean, to be a little bit strong about it, it just seems like a really egregious problem. I don't really think that people, frankly, like the idea that, you know, I guess the sort of the short way to say it is like that you're not necessarily picking your representatives are picking you. That's pretty upsetting. I guess for me personally, I'm not somebody who likes to sort of, I like to try to do something if I'm upset about something. So that's hopefully kind of what drew me to this problem. I will say what kept me kind of going through like the hard stuff is just like the incredible people that sort of work in space. Hope is obviously one of them. There's a lot of other people too who just like apply a real like, they bring both like the kind of academic rigor you would hope, but then also like an understanding that like this is a real problem for real people. And it kind of goes to like the street level of, you know, of like affecting people's lives.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my answer is similar to Indraneel, and thank you for those words. I think it's been surprising to me to kind of learn about the history of gerrymandering, that it's really not something new. It's like just a very old and dirty trick to take power away from voters. And I think especially right now, you know, last year I interviewed some young voters from North Carolina and just asked them what they thought about gerrymandering. And it was like, they were like, you know, sometimes they just don't even see the point in voting because it's like their vote doesn't really matter because of gerrymandering. And I understand that that's kind of an uncomfortable position to take in today's political climate. But I also, I mean, I totally see what's happening in the data. Like, it's like your vote really doesn't matter when you're gerrymandered to the extent the voters are in North Carolina. And so that definitely motivates me to try to work on this problem in some way. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I guess my follow-up to that is, you know, you guys are doing such wonderful work on collecting this data and creating this trove for us to actually look at truth from a more unbiased perspective. And then how do you then use that data analysis and put that into action? So what happens from Open Precincts to the Gerrymandering Project? Like, how does this create change?
Yeah, let me go back to this slide. I feel like this is kind of the, and Hope can also jump in if I'm, because I Hope worked on this more than I did. I worked on it zero, Hope worked on it the whole thing. But sort of scoring plans is kind of a big one, I would say, if you're like somebody who likes to work with the data. Because sort of I mean, everyone's thinking about the election right now, but after the election, sort of what will usually happen is a process where sort of the maps are drawn. And if there's like a public comment period, or even if there isn't, the plans, if they're made available in some capacity, you can use that and compare it against sort of vote share in like the previous election, which tends to be a really good predictor of what will happen in a future election. And that way, this slide unfortunately doesn't show it, but like you could see sort of a range of the different plans that are available compared with their vote share, and sort of see for yourself. And then also, to the extent that you want to make it public that, you know, this map isn't necessarily the best map, or this one's better than this one, or this one is like an obvious gerrymander. And I think one thing kind of going forward, we're trying to sort of build out sort of processes to incorporate is sort of people who want to get involved and like have the ability to do so. You know, we really benefit from sort of that ability to sort of quickly respond to what's happening on the ground, because the census has been delayed due to COVID-19. So it's not really clear like when that data is going to come back. And then you end up having the problem of, well, do maps get drawn really quickly without too much sort of oversight? And as we mentioned before, the problem is going to happen in all 50 states. So that's another thing that's going to be sort of a challenge, is kind of, there's not that many of us. We're a pretty small team, about like 5 people. So, being able to respond to that level is very difficult. So, we always love to see people sort of taking matters into their own hands and sort of getting involved in the reform process. And we're obviously here to help out and provide resources like OpenPrecincts.
So we had another question in the chat. What do you think of the work Azavia has done on this? And I'm not sure if you've all seen it. There was a link in the chat to their gerrymandering project.
Yeah, I mean, I know I personally have not spoken to them, but I know people on our team have. And, I think we even mentioned them in the slide earlier. They make District Builder, which I can find it. Oh, there it is. They make the third one, District Builder, which is a sort of free to use map drawing tool. So I don't know if that was what the link was. I apologize. I don't want to click it, and I don't know which tab it'll go to right now. But but I mean, that tool is awesome, and we have data that they're free to use if they want to. So
great. Do you all have any partnerships with other universities? Out in Oklahoma, the University of Oklahoma works on GIS and often gets our precinct data online and freely out there.
Yeah, I think we actually used the University of Oklahoma's data to make our precinct map. I remember having like a back and forth with someone there, so thank you if that was you. We do partner with universities, especially when, like University of Oklahoma, they sort of have a GIS warehouse that hosts the precinct files. And we had one partnership with North Carolina State University where we worked with some students to do some really outstanding map analysis. I would say, like, as an organization, we're very open to partnering with universities and, other local reform groups. To me, I think that's the best route of kind of trying to bring about local reform, is, figuring out who's already there doing work and just supporting their efforts.
How would you recommend we deal with precinct level data that does not cross legislative boundaries? Population weight across those boundaries, perhaps?
Just jumping in, the question is that precinct level data that does cross.
Oh, does cross, sorry.
Boundaries.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that doesn't actually come up too often in my experience. And I think I would use population to weight that. And sometimes if it's, if we're sort of calculating the votes of a whole, district and it's a tiny precinct, like I just won't even count the votes in that precinct if it's a small enough difference. Sometimes you can use the voter roll if you have access to that, and it's geocoded to give you some hints about, where votes should be counted. But that's getting into a more complex process for sure.
Does your team ever get involved in racial gerrymandering court cases?
Yeah, so we've done a little bit of racial gerrymandering analyses here at Princeton Gerrymandering Project. And what we've learned is that partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering often go hand in hand. And because of the sort of political polarization of our country, places where you see partisan gerrymandering happening, there's often, unfortunately, also racial gerrymandering. And so we see them as intricately interlinked issues. And so, yeah, basically, we look at them as one and the same problem, and there are similar types of analyses to study racial gerrymandering as there are partisan gerrymandering.
Yeah. If folks wanted to find more information about your work on racial gerrymandering, is it on your site?
Yeah, I think that there are maybe some links to projects we've done in Virginia. I don't think there are links up for New York, but we've done some work there on it. And I will also say MGGG has a report focused specifically on Virginia that's looking at the issue of racial gerrymandering there, and I would recommend it. I can throw a link in.
Yeah, that'd be great. Is there a ranking of states where representation doesn't match gerrymandered districts? Is there a ranking of them?
I don't know that we do one, but I think I've definitely seen one. Hope you have a better answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Sorry.
It's all right, time to start a new scale.
Maybe that's inspiration for a new project.
And we're just getting the signal that we are a little bit over time, and we're looking for if there are any. Thank you both so much for presenting. This has been such a wonderful way to kick off our election speaker series. So thank you, Hope. Thank you, Indraneel. Do you have any last comments as presenters to give to our audience? Any parting words?
Yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, again, just reach out to us on Twitter or send us an email if you're looking for ways to get involved. We'd love to talk to you. It's definitely a field that could use help. And yeah, that's all I've got.
Same. Thank you, everyone.